Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Mirror of Intimacy webinar. I'm Dr. Alexandra Katehakis, and today is Monday, June 11th. And our topic today is grief. I just want to bring your attention to the fact that the entry in Mirror of Intimacy for grief is tomorrow, June 12th, but for our purposes today, June 11th, we're going to be using that topic. So a few things before we start. I want to remind you to please leave us your book reviews or comments on Amazon for Mirror of Intimacy. We love hearing from you. Let us know what you love about the book, any stories you have about the book. We hear all sorts of fun details from people, and that really brings the book alive as a community resource more than anything. So people give this book as wedding gifts. They give it at engagements. They help their friends and family members in recovery. So please let us know what you think, even if it's just one simple sentence. And thank you for your support in advance of that. And then if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our channel by clicking the blue subscribe button below so you never miss a post. And you can also keep up with what we're doing by following me on Instagram at Alex Katehakis or at Center for Healthy Sex. The quote today is from Rupert Brooke, and he writes, "I thought when love for you died, I should die. It's dead, alone, but strangely I live on. I thought when love for you died, I should die. It's dead, alone, most strangely I live on." And I think that is a sentiment that we all feel when we've lost love, that somehow if we lose that love, if the relationship ends, that somehow we're going to die. And in fact, it can feel that way. And it feels that way, not just for psychological reasons, but for neurobiological reasons, meaning our brains and our bodies are wired to attach. And I'll talk more about that later. But the loss of a love makes us feel like we're dying. But ultimately, we're really alone. And we end up recognizing that we do live on. For as much as this feels like we're being separated greatly, or we're losing a limb metaphorically. And certainly when somebody actually dies, we feel like we are going to die, like we can't possibly go on without them. And yet, most strangely, as Brooke writes, we live on. And no one really knows the hurt of heartbreak until they've experienced it. I think that's one of the most important things of young love, of dating during our adolescent years. You know, our first crush maybe at 12, 13, 14, falling in love at 16, 17, and experiencing that heartbreak is a developmental task. And so when young people don't date, when they forego that for simply texting or sexting or hooking up, they really miss the experience that creates a resilience in all of us for being able to feel the pain of heartbreak, to lick our own wounds, so to speak, and to be able to strangely move on. And there is a gnashing pain to saying goodbye to a lover. Because we have commingled our energies with that person. We have literally attached to them in our brains and in our bodies. And when we know the relationship isn't working, when we know we have to leave in order to grow into our potential, when we've been so terribly betrayed that we can't hold a vision for healing, or when somebody dies, all of those feelings are beyond our comprehension until we live through it. And most certainly, all of us have been through that feeling when we have left a relationship because it's not working, or we feel like we've outgrown the person. When we got together, we were more immature, let's say. And as we have shifted and changed, whether it's through personal growth and development, or it's through a path of recovery, it's difficult sometimes to admit to ourselves that this person isn't right for what we want and need any longer. There is a profound grief that washes into us with that. And then our logical brain, our left brain, will swoop in and try to talk us out of what we really know in our heart of hearts to be true. So often we want to avoid the pain of breaking up, but then we suffer the pain of staying in something that feels too tight, too constricting, too abusive even, because we don't want to deal with the pain of the unknown. And also when we've been terribly betrayed, when we have been cheated on, it's very difficult to hold a vision for healing. And so we really struggle with the grief and loss of what once was. Our hopes and our dreams have been dashed, and we're in a different reality now. And so we have to come to terms with the fact that that current relationship died. It's over. And how can we, or can we, commit to a vision for healing and for repairing that relationship to move on to something that's better and stronger? If not, then it's incumbent upon us to leave. And then finally, when someone dies, that is a whole different level of grief, because we will never, ever see that person again. And we don't know what that pain is like until we live through it and grow through it, I would say. I want to remind you that if you have any comments or questions, you can post them in the Q&A box. Also, Melisa will be typing in any titles of books or resources. And then if you have any questions at any time, you can certainly call Center for Healthy Sex at 310-843-9902, and an intake counselor is available to answer your questions. So when you think about loss, consider how devastating that loss can be. Many people hold on to that devastating pain, resentment, or anger as a way to preserve or stay in the relationship with the person they've said goodbye to. And that's a challenging concept sometimes to grasp, that we stay incredibly angry at the person that left us because it's a way to hold on to them. And this can be played out in very immature ways, in retaliatory ways. And because the person is not able to grieve and get over the loss. And sometimes it feels even righteous to stay in that anger, hurt, or upset, which can really be quite a spectacular victim position, that I was wronged, I was left, I was cheated upon, and I'm not going to let that person ever live that down. I'm going to stay resentful at them, angry at them, retaliatory towards them, almost as if we think if we can dig in our heels hard enough and make that person hurt badly enough, that will make us feel better. And it's actually the inverse of that. That when we recognize that we really, really have to let go, that's what liberates us internally, not the abuse or equal and opposite infliction of pain on that person. Because we all know that over time, when we take that hardcore victim stance, that leaves us embittered and stuck, and hanging on for dear life so as not to feel the awful feelings of sorrow. And there are many stories in literature about people who hold resentments that turn them into bad or evil people. The one that most of us are familiar with is the story of the Grinch and how the Grinch stole Christmas. The Grinch was very embittered and had nothing but resentments and felt entitled to steal Christmas. And we all know what happened to him. So we don't want to feel the bad feelings of life. And these feelings are inescapable. There's no way that you can live a life, a full life, a meaningful life, a beautiful life, without experiencing the pain of loss, of brokenheartedness, of sorrow. And the mental clinging keeps us from moving on and doesn't allow us to grow through that pain, to see what it is in that we have to learn, what it is in that we're meant to do. And we always have regrets, always. We regret that we didn't say something different or do something different, or we weren't different for that person or even ourselves. And so that regret is something we have to make friends with and become comfortable with, because that's all part of the human experience. So there's a note here saying, how do you gently encourage them to let go of their righteous anger victimhood? Well, I don't know who them is, but for us, each one of us, how we encourage ourselves to let go of that is we have to look at what it's doing to ourselves. If I'm feeling resentful or hurt or angry towards someone else, that gives that person a lot of control over my inner state. I'm hurting myself. I'm actually collapsing down into a state that has physiological deficits to it. It creates high levels of cortisol, which is the stress hormone. It can create depression or anxiety or upset. And no one's doing that to me but me, if that's the case. And so I have to come to terms with recognizing that that person was not just out to get me. It becomes very, very personal and, dare I say, even a little self-centered to think that anything that was done to me that hurt me was all about me. That person clearly had their issues. That person was struggling or had their own deficits or could not be honest or was deceitful. But it wasn't because I wasn't a good enough human being. And so there's plenty of work that people do, that are in 12-step programs around prayer and meditation and healing words of affirmation to let that person go, to surround them in white light, if you will, and wish the best for them so that you can let them go and you can move on. And also look at maybe what your part was in what happened. Why didn't I choose better? What was going on with me that I made this okay for me, that I tolerated this? And what does that reflect, or how does that reflect on how I grew up, what my family of origin issues are, how I learned to maybe caretake to people or rescue people or get involved with people that are what I call fixer-uppers. And then I'm angry at that person because they didn't earn as much as I did, or they lied about something or other because I saw the signs along the way, but I didn't want to look that closely. So this is a path of rigorous responsibility, rigorous acceptance, and being clear with oneself about what happened to me, where I was victimized, where I was hurt, and what my part was in it also, and how I can make different choices next time. Not what was my part in it so I can beat myself up, but how can I do something different next time so that I don't hurt myself again and again and again. Cyrus says, if possible, could you possibly speak to the concept of narcissistic abuse and the grieving process with regards to staying stuck because we cannot answer the question why? Why did this person who was one way in the idealization phase then almost suddenly decide to devalue and discard? Well, this is a tough question, and certainly there are experts that have written books about being in relationship with narcissistic people. But it's hard, I think, to forgive ourselves for getting involved with people that are hurtful, that are mean, because it cuts to the core of our own narcissistic woundedness. Like, why wasn't I more lovable? Why wasn't I more handsome, sexy, smarter? What was it about me that had that person treating me poorly? And that's not the right question. That is a problematic question. That's a question that speaks to our own narcissistic woundedness, that somehow I'm not good enough, as opposed to that person was really distorted. That person was not right. That person turned on the charm in the beginning. It was all hearts and flowers, or the, proverbial snow job. And I fell for it. I fell in love because I wanted to be wanted in that way. There's no harm in that. I wanted to be loved in that way. I wanted to be cared for in that way. Who doesn't? But sometimes we're blinded by that light. We're blinded by that, and we don't see the person's shadow side, because we all have it. All of us have the capacity for anger, selfishness, pettiness, having bad days, you name it. And when we don't see that in someone who's just got the charm turned on, we're in a state of self-deception. And that's what we want to look at, not asking the question about why wasn't I lovable. The correct question is, what happened that I was so blinded by that? How did I deceive myself? Why do I have a tolerance for that sort of deception, which typically lands us back to our family of origin, where we have a high capacity for dysfunction, whatever the dysfunction was. So to drop the story about yourself and beating yourself up and why you weren't good enough, and to start to have a more curious stance, a non-judgmental stance about what was what here and what happened to both parties and what can I do differently, or how do I look differently? Can I use a different lens going forward? And then release that person and let them go. And part of releasing and letting go someone who's toxically narcissistic like that is to really shut everything down. That means no contact, no texting, no phone calls, no social media, no nothing. There's really nothing left to talk about when something that bad happens. It's important to just move on and to, heal your wounds in your own process. And someone writes, how do you find forgiveness with your partner's affair partner, or at least find peace? Well, hopefully you're not in relationship with your partner's affair partner. So that's not a person you even actually have a relationship with. It's a person you have a fantasy relationship with. And I always find when I'm angry at someone other than the person I'm in relationship with, that means I'm really angry at the person I'm in relationship with, but I've displaced my anger onto the secondary person. So for those of you that have a step parent, it's easy to be angry at the step parent as opposed to your parent who married that person, right? All your anger can get displaced onto that person. If you have a partner who's had an affair, you can be enraged at the affair partner as opposed to your partner, who's the one who cheated on you, or at the very least didn't tell you that they were interested in having sex outside of the relationship and negotiate that with you. They made a unilateral decision. So clearly that person has their issues if they're in relationship with someone who's married or in a long-term relationship or has a boyfriend or girlfriend, but they're the wrong person, again, to be angry at. So pay attention to whether you're asking the right question and if you're angry at the right person. So remember that grief is an essential step in our progress forward, that it requires the ego and the recriminations to get out of the way so we can become vulnerable and fully feel the loss of what once was. And that is a big reason why people blame the affair partner or stay enraged or angry or keep trying to make it work out, because we don't want to deal with the abject pain, the abyss of pain that we hit when we really step into our grief and the vulnerability that comes with that, because oftentimes it's not just the grief of what just happened. It's grief that has long-reaching tentacles into the past, sometimes into our childhood, where we were left or repeatedly abandoned or not nurtured or taken care of. And we don't want to hit the depths of that grief. And I believe grief is an invitation to go into the depths of our vulnerability, to feel today what we couldn't feel then. And oftentimes, the person that has left us or we've broken up with is giving us a gift, dare I say. They're giving us a portal into our vulnerability, into healing something deep that we couldn't see before. And so this surface level thing, or not surface and superficial, but this present day circumstance is a portal into the past. And when we can see it as an invitation to walk into the past, to heal our brokenheartedness, then it does become a gift in a really strange way, not in the kind that we're used to thinking about, not the beautiful blue box from Tiffany's, but a very different kind of gift that creates integration, that makes us feel more whole, more known, more seen, because we do become vulnerable with ourselves and with other people. So Lori writes, if the old relationship is over and dead, but we are starting over, what would be the first step in starting a new relationship with your sex addicted husband? Well, that's a complex question. I mean, the very first place of ground zero is a full formal disclosure with a qualified therapist, so you can get to the truth and understand what happened, why it happened, and then begin to look at the dynamics in the marriage, either before the addiction started or from the beginning. And not to say what was your part in it, but what was the dynamic between the two of you? What didn't you see? What was missing, if anything at all? And how do you start to have a conversation, a constructive conversation about where you go from here? But that typically requires skilled professional help. And it's a long process. I mean, the sort of conventional wisdom is that it takes 3 to 5 years for people to heal in marriages where there's been extreme and compulsive betrayal. Karen says, I'm a betrayed partner who's trying to heal the relationship. My partner's been in real recovery for 6 months, sober for 3 years. I worry that I will never love him the way I did before recovery, and worry that this is a sign that my efforts for relational healing are futile. Well, the truth is, you may never love him the way you once did, and that is a point of grief and sorrow. And when we think about long-term marriages, marriages that have been, 25 plus years, do we love the person we started out with in the same way we love them on day 1 or month 3 or year 4? And the answer is no, that the quality of that love changes, it deepens. There is a familiarity that comes with that, a deep attachment, both in the central and autonomic nervous systems to that other being. That's why the thought of leaving can be so painful. So I don't know that any of us will ever be in love in the same way, but I do think we can be in love in different ways. And these are moments of deep love, moments of in love, moments of novelty. Hopefully, if you can find play states together, vacation time together, times when you can be sexual that feels novel or new, that's when you'll have those moments of a different kind of love. But it's very difficult to ever have anything be what it once was. I was talking to a colleague of mine yesterday, Dawn Cartwright, who's a renowned tantric teacher. And she said to me, it feels like we're in a whole different world now. And she's not the first person who said that, certainly. But I said to her, you're right. 2 years seems like a really long time, but 2 years passes in a flash. But when you're 2 years in lockdown, you don't realize how much goes on in a year until you're 2 years out of a lockdown, and then realize the entire world seems like it flipped on its head or changed. And likewise, in a long-term relationship, every year there are substantial changes happening in each individual, each human being. And if we don't stay current with each other, we don't actually grow together. We grow apart. We become different. We're becoming different anyway, but are we keeping current with each other about those differences, about what we want, what we like, what turns us on sexually, what doesn't turn us on anymore? So there's no way of going back to once was. It's now about what are we doing today, and is there the possibility of a tomorrow for us? And so we need to feel that full-bodied sensation of our grief and loss. We can't ever get past that. And letting go and grieving is actually a healing process. It's a cleansing process for everybody. Sometimes we think we are saving the other person from hurting them. I hear this all the time. I don't want to hurt the other person. Meanwhile, you're lying in deception about not really being sexually attracted, not really wanting to be them, is hurting them every single day. So when we can be vulnerable and tell the truth and open up our emotional prison, if you will, and energetically release ourselves and our former lovers and beloved and move on, that is an incredible gift that you're giving both parties and everybody involved with them also. Someone says, please talk more about the snow job, was my first time hearing this term. Oh, well, I think that's probably an older term, but it's when somebody comes on too strong, when it's way too much too fast. I think today the term would be love bombing, like too many texts, emails, flowers, chocolates, wanting to spend time with you, being swept off your feet in a way that feels dizzying, where you really can't see who this person is because it's such a bright, shiny light 24/7. And no one can sustain that. It's not real life, actually. So I'm just suggesting that you pay attention to the signs and symbols of someone who is narcissistically inclined or love addicted. And that's not to be jaded either, or not to enjoy the process of falling in love. It's a beautiful, delicious, sweet process that you don't want to deprive yourself of, but you also don't want the love to outpace the relationship. And what I mean by that is that it's easy to have sex. It's easy to have this, incredible wash of dopamine and adrenaline and oxytocin that makes us feel all yummy and excited inside. But if you're not paying attention to the in-between times, the conversations, the meeting of the other person's friends, you're missing who that person actually really is. And I used to have a colleague who would recommend that people pick a fight if they hadn't had a fight like 4 or 6 months into their dating relationship, to see how that person would fight and how they would actually repair. And he wasn't talking about, a massive knockout, drag out fight, but enough to create an argument is probably a better word, to see, does that person fight dirty? Do they take responsibility for themselves? Do they escalate? Do they calm things down? Like, what's their style of being able to fight and then repair? Because we know from John Gottman's research that people who repair, who have a way of repairing arguments, are the ones who are more likely to stay together and for longer. Susie says, I'm married to someone who is in recovery for sex addiction, has low emotional IQ, and is highly narcissistic. I've been grieving the relationship I thought I had. I realized dysfunctional upbringing brought me to this place. We're working on repair, but I still seem to be grieving. It's 1 year since D-Day. How do I move out of grief? Well, Susie, I think the question you have to ask yourself is, will you do anything to make this relationship work? Does this person have deficits that aren't going to be bridgeable for you? Doesn't mean somebody else can't coexist with them, but can you coexist with them? Or are you always going to feel like you've been shortchanged, like you didn't get what you wanted and needed? And is it good enough? At some point we have to be willing to be in a good enough relationship. But if it's not good enough, if it's in the negative numbers, and I think this is where it's useful to just make a simple pros and cons list so you can see it in black and white, and then to talk about it with someone that you trust or a therapist, and then try it on for size. What would it be like if I divorced? Where would I live? Where would I go? What kind of life would I want for myself? How would that actually feel? Like, try it on for size, imagine it fully, and think about it. And if I didn't do that, what would it be like to stay? And if I stay, what do I need from myself? Not just my partner, but if I'm going to be with somebody who doesn't completely align with me, what am I going to start doing differently? Instead of constantly accommodating to that person to make it work, how do I start to shift my focus more towards what I want, what I need, what I like? And maybe there will be some overlap. I think you need some overlap. If you think about a Venn diagram, there's got to be some overlap so that you have some things in common and things you want to do together. But then there are things on the margins where you both don't agree or you don't do things together. And that's when you find lives that are separate but apart, together but different. And this is not a model that we are ever trained with or talked to. We're talked to about the happily ever after model, where you're sort of glued together at the hip and you do everything together no matter what. And if you don't, something's wrong with the relationship, as opposed to, oh, we're two different individuals and we've been together for a long time, so we're really different individuals now. And we have to remember what brought us together in the first place. Why did we fall in love? What was it about this person that was appealing to me? And is it still appealing to me? And if the answer is yes, then how do we look at our differences and accommodate separate vacations, separate ways of celebrating things, respecting each other's differences and also being with those differences when we can be, but not having to be joined at the hip all the time. And so a lot of you are asking this question about, well, how do we move on? What's actually happening in grief? And I think it's worth noting that there was a 2008 study by a researcher named O'Connor and her team at the University of UCLA on what they called enduring grief. And they found that complicated grief or enduring grief occurred when an individual had prolonged feelings that continued long after the person was gone. And in this case, they were looking at deceased persons. But I think we can relate this to relationship breakups, even though this data is specifically about deceased persons. And what they found was that the neural mechanisms are related to social pain of loss and the loss of attachment, which makes 100% sense. And this attachment behavior was correlated to yearning, which is an activation of the reward system. So I want you to think about that. When somebody dies, the reward system gets activated. Now, why would that be? Because the seeking system is in the brain system. And a well-renowned neuroscience named Jaak Panksepp, who was famous for working with rats because rats have the same architecture of the brain as humans do, with the exception of our neocortex. He studied rats because of that reason. And so we learned a lot about the human brain because of rat studies. And the seeking system is what he called the granddaddy of the 7 circuits that all mammals share, and it originates in the brain stem. And seeking is highly exuberant, and so is dopamine. So it's seeking dopamine, seeking excitatory things, because we are salient seeking creatures, meaning we look for that in the environment that gets our attention. So whether it's an attractive person or a piece of chocolate or a yummy buffet or a new car, you name it, we get very activated by the seeking system. So seeking activates the reward system, which we know as the subcortical dopamine system. So it's not the acquisition of the reward, it's the seeking of the reward that's excitatory. That's the dopamine system that we hear about and talk about all the time. So when somebody dies or when we lose someone, we start looking for them. We're seeking, we're yearning, we're looking for them. And that's often why we expect somebody to come around the corner anytime, or we wonder obsessively what they're doing, where they're going. Are they still thinking about me? Those of you that have any issues with love addiction know how obsessive that can be. And what they termed enduring grief is a pattern of painful emotions, including yearning and longing and preoccupation or searching for our loved ones. And scholars have hypothesized that the attachment system is activating this reward pathway, as I said, which is really the seeking system. And this neural response could have the properties of addiction. There's a craving response, a desire to engage in pleasurable reveries is what they wrote about. So when you think about pleasurable reveries, you can say that quickly, we're remembering all the good times, all the fun times we had together. So when somebody dies, of course, we're thinking about that and missing them deeply. But when we break up with toxic people, we tend to also engage in those reveries, remembering all the good times, which can erase the bad times, the reasons that we left the person, the reason we didn't want to be in relationship with them anymore. And that process interferes with us adapting to the loss of the loved one in the present moment. So when we're in relationship with someone, we're connected with them by way of time, proximity, and attachment. Right? So in other words, we always know when we last saw the person. We have a sense of when we'll see them again, and we know they are where they are most of the time. So you think about that right now. If you think about a child, or a spouse right now, or a good friend, you probably have a sense of where they are right now and when you're going to see them again. But when we lose somebody, that system is still activated. And our attachment to that system, so I'm talking about time and proximity, that's what we lose when we break up with somebody. That's what we lose when somebody dies. But our attachment to that person never really dies. Um, but the challenge is to let go of time and proximity and to focus on our attachment. So your attachment to your loved one and your connection to them has to stay out of obsession. That's the challenge too, when it's a relational situation. If you're inclined in that way, you've got to stay in reality. If it's somebody who has died that you love deeply, you can stay attached to them forever, and you will if you've lost somebody in that way. I know that I think about both of my parents every single day in one way or the other, not because I'm trying to think of them, but something reminds me of them all the time. Food, music, a passing thought, my sense of humor, anything can bring one or both of them back to me on any given day, just even talking about them right now. So that attachment never has to go. But I can't be in a state of obsession about not believing they're really dead. And I have to let go the fact that I will never see them again. And I don't really know where they are right now. And I'm okay with that also. Um, there's a book by Florence Williams I would turn your attention to called Heartbreak. And she talks about how devastating her divorce was after 18 or 20 years, that she married quite young. And her husband came home one day and told her he wasn't in love with her anymore. And that really flipped her world upside down. And she spent a lot of time speaking to psychologists and neuroscientists and neurologists to figure out what is going on in the brain and why we feel this incredibly painful attachment that does not seem to go away. And her answer to that was awe and wonder. She writes about how the way she got over her divorce was by spending a lot of time in nature where she could be in awe and wonder of the natural world, which makes a lot of sense because being in the natural world, being in awe, being in wonder brings us right smack dab in the middle of the present moment into deep, deep gratitude for our very life. And so when you can get into the present, when you can be in gratitude, there's no place for agonizing about the woulda, coulda, shouldas of that person. And slowly but surely over time, we do release and we do let go. So we have a few more questions here. I discovered my wife's 3-year affair 21 months ago after we've been married for 24 years. I've accepted my pain as very real and I'm worrying to keep from sinking into victimhood. Well, I'm very sorry about that, Andy. I think betrayal is actually worse than cheating because when you're cheating, lying, you know you're doing it, right? So if you get caught, um, it's a lot easier than being betrayed because when you're betrayed, you've been completely blindsided. You have no idea what just happened. You didn't see it coming. And so being able to work through that grief and loss and pain, as we've been talking about here today, is no easy feat. So take care of your heart, do what's best for you. See if you can take yourself on a short or long vacation this summer, someplace beautiful where you can really rest in yourself. And then a follow-up question is, what are the proper expectations of my wife who's indicated his desire to reconcile? Well, I think in that case, whenever somebody has been the betrayer, they have a very, very big problem. It's not just about deceit and lying. They're seeking something else outside of the relationship, and they don't have the capacity to sit down and look you in the eye and say, hi, I'm not happy, or this relationship isn't working for me, and we need to do something different. We need to get help, or we need to talk about an open relationship, or take a year off, or something, offering some sort of solution, or a solution that we figure out together. So in order for that person to really get better, you have to see that they are committed by their actions to getting better, meaning they're in therapy every single week. They are in a 12-step program and they have a sponsor and they're working the program, or they're doing something along those lines. It doesn't have to be 12-step, but they have to commit to some system of getting better. Being in a women's group in this case, but high levels of accountability and a deep commitment to reading, writing, and doing the work every single day, because this isn't just going to go away. Apologies are not enough. This has to be what they call a living amends, a living, breathing, day-to-day focus on doing something different. How do you feel the loss grief without getting bogged down with those hard feelings? I'm struggling with how to honor strong negative feelings without getting stuck in things like anger, self-pity, sorrow. Reframing them feels like it walks the line of repressing them and triggers a fear that I'm not healing. I hope the question makes sense. My husband disclosed infidelity and sex addiction a year ago, and about a month after disclosure, my father died unexpectedly in an accident. Wow. So you're really dealing with compounded grief. Well, I would suggest that if you can work with a grief doula, or you can go do a grief workshop so that you can separate out these two forms of grief, and really make a space to grieve the loss of your dad, because I think you're going to feel bad if you can't put that in its right place and also honor your father, um, and have a discrete space for that kind of grief. Where the other is concerned, grief is messy business, and the only cure for grief is grief itself. So you have to let yourself cry and be angry, and even feel bogged down. Say, I feel bogged down right now. So are there small things you can do on any given day that help you out of the bog, whether it's calling a girlfriend that you love, or going for a walk in a park, or listening to music that's uplifting. Just one little thing that helps you move in and out of those feelings. So be gentle with yourself and allow this process to unfold. The danger of it, of course, is letting it go on, for too long, whatever too long would be for you. And I often see partners of sex addicts that are just exhausted from a year of, crying, um, being in anger, feeling so hurt and victimized and decimated that they are literally making themselves sick, or the grief is making them sick. So at some point, you have got to come to your own rescue. You've got to get professional people to help you out, and help you get out of that quagmire and really turn your victimhood into victorhood, and move into a place of empowerment of what am I going to do here? Because we can only stay in the ground in a puddle for so long before we have to start to mobilize. Because if we don't mobilize, we're really re-traumatizing ourselves. And keep in mind that the brain is designed to move the body. If you're under assault, if somebody's, attacking you, the brain is designed to run, to flee. If you can't fight, you've got to run. And when you have a situation like this kind of betrayal, you're not able to run or fight. You're just, again, in a puddle. You've got to be able to start to fight back. And that means not literally, fists up fighting or raging, but what does it mean to set boundaries? What does it mean to take time out for myself? How do I make a space to go away, to do something that I need to do, even if I don't know what I need to do? Find something I need to do to mobilize and move some of this grief out of my system. Let's see, someone writes here, I'm a sex addict whose discovery resulted in separation and amicable divorce within the span of 10 months. I don't understand why I still feel I'm in a relationship with someone who isn't talking to me. I believed we needed this space to heal and we'd get together. I feel like grief doesn't make sense. Well, I think maybe what doesn't make sense for you is that you're not understanding how badly you hurt the person that you divorced or divorced you, and that person is telling you they don't want to have anything to do with you. And that is something you have to make sense of and you have to accept. So this again is about radical acceptance. You hurt that person immeasurably. It was not repairable for her or him. And so you have to deal with what you did and look at why you did what you did, and find a way to take rigorous responsibility for it while also grieving your loss and your pain so that you can move on and heal and ultimately forgive yourself. Do not expect your ex-partner to forgive you. They don't have to. You have to forgive yourself, but you can't do that until you deconstruct what happened, that you ever put yourself in that position to begin with. So while I'm sorry for your pain, you have to take responsibility for this, and you have to be clear that you broke something and it's not fixable. All right, so one more question here. I have a deep mother abandonment wound when she passed away a year ago in August. My therapist does, as you says, in order to heal, I have to feel the painful feelings. Once I feel those, how will I know I'm healing? Well, you'll know when you know. When we dive deeply into our pain and our loss, when we dive deep into these abandonment wounds, which often means that we're belly sobbing, we can't get out of bed. It doesn't go on forever, but it does go on because when you have structures where you are cordoning off or compartmentalizing or dissociating your feelings, you're not a whole person, you're numb. You can't possibly feel joy and you know, play and fun if you cannot feel the depths of your sorrow. And when you can feel the depths of your sorrow, you'll know, you will feel more integrated. Your body, your felt sense in your body will feel different. So I would encourage you to be courageous, to take the plunge into your body, into the depths of your pain, and go back and get that little child and bring that child into the present where there's no abandonment and no fear and no terror and no loss. But you can't leapfrog that process. All right, so for our daily healthy sex acts today, if you're holding on to an old wound and haven't let yourself feel the loss, take time today to write about what keeps you invested. What exactly are you seeking or hoping for? And free yourself with a good cry over your primary losses. Write your loved one a no-send letter, letting them go, or saying whatever you need to say to them. Bury that letter, burn that letter, but put it all out there. Do not send it to them. Remember the good that was there, but stay away from the expectation of ever seeing that person again. You have to let them go. And then have a small ceremony to commemorate the anniversary of the loss of a loved one, whether it means a relational loss or a literal loss. Light a candle in that person's name to free them. Throw a rock into the ocean to symbolize an aspect of the relationship that needs to be let go. Or plant some flowers so that grief can blossom into something new. So thank you for hanging in there with what is a pretty vulnerable and raw and difficult topic. And I hope that this has helped you point your compass in the direction of letting go your pain. And the way you let go is you dive into it head on, fully, wholeheartedly dive into your grief and loss and pain and see what's there. So I hope you have a beautiful rest of this sunny July and that you're enjoying your summer. And I look forward to seeing you in August.